chapter 18, I'm sorry, chapter 18, verse 35. This is now Jesus on the verge of stepping into Jerusalem. Verse 35, as he drew near to Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging, and hearing a crowd going by, he inquired what this meant. Now there probably was there was a crowd going by because it was Passover, and you had lots of pilgrims making their way to Jerusalem. Okay? And so that really adds color to this story here. And he cries out, or they told him, he asked what it meant, and they told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. Actually, that's not exactly a great translation. Nazareth, it's actually Nazarene, which does not refer to a place, really. And what's going on there? In fact, if you read a lot of the pagan historians, if they ever talk about Christianity, they'll call it the sect of the Nazareans. They won't say Christians or things like that. They'll say Jesus the Nazarene. Okay, so that's something that the pagan historians later on would use to refer to this little group, this little religion. Nazarene is related to the Hebrew word nazar, which means branch or root. And Isaiah chapter 11, I think it's 11, I think it's 11, talks about how there's a branch of Jesse that will spring up. And if you look at what does the blind man call Jesus, verse 38. So Jesus the Nazarene is passing by, and then how does he cries out, Jesus, son of David, which is Jesse's son. So there's a little tie there between what he's told, it registers, and then his cry for help. It makes use of what he was told about the person passing by. It's Jesus the Nazarene. Okay? Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Go to okay, that happens in Jericho. Chapter 19, verse 1 and following happens in Jericho with Zacchaeus. We know that story. Here again, you get a little frame in the gospel. At the beginning of the gospel, you had Jesus eating with a tax collector named Levi. At the end of the gospel, you have Jesus eating with a tax collector named Zacchaeus. And not just a tax collector, he's called chief tax collector. And that word is not used in the rest of the New Testament or in any Greek writing. It's very rare. Zacchaeus was wealthy. Okay? Very wealthy. And so here you contrast what Jesus does for this poor beggar, and then the next moment later he's eating with a very, very wealthy man, Zacchaeus. Okay? And so Jesus comes for all people, no matter what their station in life. We are all poor spiritually before God. But Christ has riches to give us. And he does it. He heals a blind man. Just like he said at the synagogue in Nazareth that day, which we'll hear in the gospel reading, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to bring sight to the blind. And so Jesus is fulfilling that sermon, and Isaiah, which preceded both. Go to just some of the things in the Passion story. If you look on your outline, it has some numbers there, 285 out of 850. That's how many verses deal just with the 1 week of Jesus' life, from Palm Sunday to the end of the Gospel. So 1/3 of the Gospel deals with 1 week. And that's true of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or Matthew, Mark, and John also. When you add up all the numbers, 1/3 of the Gospel just zeroes in on that part. One thing I want to talk about before I need to leave, 22, go to 22. Verse 63. Yeah. 66. In a very short period of time here, there's going to be 4 titles for Jesus. 4 important titles for Jesus that are going to surface. And in a lot of ways, that is what seals his death, are the claims that he's making and others are making about him, about who he is. And so, 66, we see some of these titles. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council. And they said, if you are the Christ, there's the first one, if you are the anointed one. Strong Old Testament language, you are the Messiah. If you notice the chasuble, it has the Chi-Rho, which are the first two letters in Greek for Christ, the anointed one. And that's the theme for the gospel today. Jesus in the synagogue of Nazareth, he unrolls the scroll, he reads Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me, he has Christed me to preach good news to the poor. That's the purpose of the anointing: preach good news to the poor, sight to the blind, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, etc. So Christ, that's the first title. But he said to them, if I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. From now on, the Son of Man, second title to appear. That title is only found on Jesus' lips. No one else ever calls him that. He uses that for himself. The Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. So they all said, are you the Son of God then? So that's what they understand. They're putting everything together here. Son of God, third title. And he said to them, you say, I am. Okay, and then there's the fourth one, I am, the great name of God. And then they said, what further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips. Blasphemy. You yourself, a mere man, calling yourself God. Jesus before Pilate and Herod, crucifixion. Chapter 23, verse 35. The rulers are scoffing. And he's on the cross. If he saved others, let him save himself. If he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. That's also used in other places in the gospel to talk about Christ, that he's been chosen, elected by God. The death of Jesus. Notice verse 50. The burial of Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea does this. Put him in the tomb. And then they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 is the last thing I'll be able to look at with you. The road to Emmaus. This is unique to Luke's gospel. It's a great story. We talked earlier about the importance of the motif of journeying, traveling, the way. Okay, we mentioned that refers to catechesis. That's another word for catechesis, or instruction in the faith, is the way. In fact, in Acts, Christianity is called that, the way. But here we have chapter 24, verse 13. And they're traveling on the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and it takes about 7 miles. This is to the north and west of Jerusalem. Okay, Bethany is to the east, toward Jericho. Emmaus is basically the other way. Jesus himself drew near and went along with them, and they're talking. And there's questions, and there's answers. And how does the catechesis end up? Where do they eventually end up? They end up in the house, eating a meal. Same thing for catechesis for us Christians. The instruction that we receive, the goal is to be in the church, the house, eating the meal, the Lord's Supper. And so the same thing is going on here. I wanted to talk briefly about, there's a slight difference between